Welcome to episode 112 of the show with no name. I'm your humble host, Nick, and today we're going to be exploring this awesome old farmer cemetery out here in Creston, Washington. This cemetery goes by the name of the Creston Cemetery. Let's get into this. I have a lot of information regarding a lot of the people that are buried here in this cemetery, so I'm just going to get right into it today and start this episode off by talking about a man whose name was Edwin Reuben Alberg. I have a picture of his obituary right here, and it reads, "Retired farmer killed by car. Davenport, Washington, March 17th, Ed Alberg, 64, a retired farmer of Lincoln County, was instantly killed when struck by a car as he walked on the highway late last night in Creston, 21 miles west of here," Sheriff Frank C. Rambo reported. The sheriff and prosecuting attorney Fred G. Campbell investigated and reported that a machine driven by A.J. Connor, an employee at Grand Coulee Dam, hit Alberg, and that witnesses reported that Connor was not driving at excessive speed. They said the driver would not be held, pointing out that the pavement was wet at the time and Alberg was wearing dark clothing. Connor told officers he did not see the man until he was upon him. Sheriff Rambo said Alberg died of a broken neck. Riding with Connor was his wife and daughter. Alberg was born in June 1885 and lived with a brother, Dougie, in Creston. He has not been farming actively for some time. He was a World War I veteran. The body was taken to Wilbur. He doesn't have a gravestone here at the cemetery, but he's buried right here next to Peter Alberg. I'm now going to talk about one of the most tragic deaths that I've ever documented out here in one of these cemeteries, and that is the death of Karen Lee Anderson. Coulee Dam girl dies from burns. Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming, September 14th. Karen Lee Anderson, age 4, of Coulee Dam, Washington, was burned fatally in a hot water pool in Yellowstone Park yesterday. Park headquarters said the girl pulled away from her mother, Mrs. Theodore Anderson, and ran to the pool. She fell in and went under the surface. The girl was pulled from the pool. A doctor at Old Faithful gave first aid, and the child was taken to the hospital where she passed away. Her body was covered by second and third degree burns. Karen's father is a Reclamation Bureau employee. Besides her parents, Karen is survived by a brother, Teddy, who is 12 years old. Funeral services will be at Coulee Dam. This is little Karen Lee Anderson's headstone right here. She was just 4 years old. I'm going to talk about the Boatsman family now, specifically Dirk and Gertrude Boatsman. And Dirk, he was something of an inventor that died a pretty odd death. Death is thief of new device. D.J. Boatsman spoke of his invention a few minutes before he died. A new type of motor, which may have been of real benefit to mankind, was lost, maybe forever, with the death Sunday evening of Dirk John Boatsman, 66, an inventor and florist. Mr. Boatsman had perfected several inventions, which proved practical. What he claimed was his best, and he was the first man to invent it, although he lost it through lack of financial backing, was the tie bar used in joining railroad track together. He was talking about the new motor he was working on only a few minutes before he died. His son Henry said yesterday, "When I asked him when he was going to start making a model, he answered, 'Monday morning.' I thought he had left the room to get some sketches of it. He was found dead in the bathroom, a victim of heart failure." Born in Iowa, Mr. Boatsman came to Washington 30 years ago and homesteaded in the section near Creston. He had lived in Spokane 15 years. He was an expert florist and nurseryman. This is a picture of Dirk and his wife Gertrude and one of their 8 children. I would like to spend a few minutes now talking about the Brannan family, specifically Thomas Jefferson Brannan and his wife, Elmira Rogers Brannan. And this is their headstone here. His inscription is on one side and his wife, Elmira's, is on the other side, as you can see. Thomas Jefferson Brannan was born to Moses Brannan and Cassandra French Brannan on April 8, 1930, in Brownstown, Jackson County, Indiana. He died August 22, 1924, in Peach, Lincoln County, Washington. In 1850, at the age of 20, Thomas Jefferson Brannan was a teacher in Grassy Fork Township, Jackson County, Indiana. He lived with his sister and her family, and his father Moses was also living in the household. In 1851, Thomas and his extended family in the area traveled to Iowa County, Iowa, by wagon. He would get married to Elmira Rogers, and it is said that they were married in Lotts Grove, Missouri on August 1st, 1858. Elmira was the daughter of Daniel and Catherine Rogers. Thomas and Elmira would have 7 children together. They were Pacific Northwest pioneers. Thomas, Elmira, and their children are first identified in Oregon in 1870 and in Whitman County, Washington Territory in 1880. However, their son, James Grant Bannon, was born in Benton County, Oregon in 1867, so the family was in Oregon before 1870. While in Oregon, the family lived in Benton County. In Washington, they lived in Whitman, Lincoln, and Okanogan counties. Thomas was living in Peach, Washington at the time of his death. Interred in the W.L. Brannan Cemetery in the autumn of 1939, his remains were moved by Ball and Dodd as part of the Bureau of Reclamation project for Grand Coulee Dam and reinterred in the Peach Cemetery. Later, his remains were removed to the Creston Cemetery in Creston, Lincoln County, Washington. Thomas Jefferson Brannan and Elmira Brannan are both mentioned in the history of the Big Bend country. His wife, Elmira Rogers, was born on November 30th, 1836 in Columbus, Ohio. And her story is pretty interesting too. In 1861, a pregnant Elmira and her husband Thomas took their 2 small boys and traveled from Missouri to California, where they joined Thomas's brother Emanuel Hamlin Brannan in the Susanville, Honey Lake area of California, which at the time was disputed as belonging to either the Nevada Territory or the Plumas County, California Territory. That same year, Elmira would give birth to their 3rd child and first daughter in a wagon either on the way to or shortly after arriving in Susanville. Separated from her birth family, it was a hard and isolated life, as the Susanville Honey Lake region was a harsh place with extreme weather, few comforts, and ruffians populating the mining camps and town of Susanville. Elmira was living there with 3 children under the age of 5. In 1862, Elmira's firstborn child, Daniel, died at the age of 4 years and 4 months. He is buried in the historical Susanville Cemetery in Susanville, California. After Daniel's death, the family would head to Oregon. So, they actually had 8 kids, Elmira and Thomas Brannan, and 7 of them made it to adulthood. In 1863, Elmira gave birth to her 4th child, Millie, in a wagon train on the Oregon Trail. Her next 4 children, James, William, Charles, and Marcus, were born in 3 Oregon Territory counties. They were a very interesting and industrious, strong, and hardworking, and they made it all the way out here to Washington on the Oregon Trail. It really is pretty amazing. This is Robert E. Mitchell and his wife Dee. Robert E. Mitchell would pass away in a tragic accident involving a plane. California man is plane crash victim. Denver, December 12th. 2 Lower E field officers killed late yesterday in a training plane crash in Illinois were identified today as First Lieutenant Robert E. Mitchell of Creston, Washington, and Harold J. Bestkin of California. 2 men, only occupants of a 2-engine trainer, were killed when the craft fell 3 miles southeast of Chanute Field. They were on a cross-country training flight from Lower E Field. Mitchell, the pilot, was 30 years old and was married. Bestkin, the co-pilot, was 21 and single, his next of kin being his mother, Mrs. Alma Bestkin of California. His wife would end up moving on with her life, and he would just kind of stay here in Creston where he was buried. This is his headstone right here. Nels Nelson was a Swedish immigrant that came out here to the area, and this is his obituary right here. Pioneer farmer passes. Creston, Washington, April 20th. Nels Nelson, pioneer farmer, died Sunday after an illness of only a few minutes' duration. Born in Sweden in 1866, he came to this country with only his personal effects when a lad of 20. He came to Spokane in 1889 and to Creston in 1890, where he settled on a farm south of town where he had lived ever since. Accidentally kills wife. Mrs. Yenny of Walla Walla, Washington, victim of shotgun. September 7th, Conrad F. Yenny, a farmer living on Dry Creek about 6 miles from the city, accidentally shot and killed his wife, Hermina Augusta Yenny, age 49, at about 1 o'clock this afternoon. Coroner Joe Chamberlain, who investigated, declared it was purely an accident. Mr. Yenny had gone from the house to the creek, accompanied by his wife. He took his shotgun, expecting to see a peasant. His wife walked ahead of him 4 or 5 feet. Mr. Yenny heard a bird flutter and raised his gun. The weapon was discharged, the load entering the body of his wife just above the kidneys. Mrs. Yenny whirled around and gasped, "I am shot," and threw her arms about her husband's neck and sank to the ground, dead. Mr. Yenny is almost prostrated by the shock. I'm going to end this episode today talking about a man whose name was Charles A. Straub, and he was a pioneer in this area, and he also took part in some pretty historic stuff that we're going to talk about now. Tracy's captor taken by death. Charles Straub, member of posse which ended career of notorious killer. Charles A. Straub, one of the members of the little posse which captured the notorious killer Harry Tracy near Creston, Washington more than 20 years ago, died last night at Deaconess Hospital. Mr. Straub was a resident of Creston. Maurice Smith was another member of the posse which surrounded the field in which the bandit had taken refuge and closed in on him. There was a gun battle in the dusk in a large wheat field, and one of the three men in the posse hit the bandit in the leg with a bullet from a rifle. After the firing had ceased, and silence had been unbroken for some time, there was a single report of a discharging pistol. When dawn came, the men crawled forward and found the body of the outlaw, Tracy, wounded. He had been unable to escape and chose suicide as the way out of his difficulties. Mr. Straub at that time was a Creston resident, and Mr. Smith, who later became city commissioner here and who now is the second highest ranking federal prohibition agent in the Western District, was practicing law in Creston. When the word came that the killer, who had left a trail of dead pursuers and companions behind him, was in the vicinity of Creston, Mr. Straub was one of the men who went out to get him. With the two others, he found the haunt of Tracy. Mr. Straub had maintained his residence in Creston for many years and maintained his home here until the time of his death. The fact that he had faced the much-feared killer and was a party to the capture had won him wide respect throughout the community. And for years after the West's most notorious desperado of all time was killed, Mr. Straub was the center of attention of the hero-worshipping public. The Harry Tracy story in of itself is a pretty interesting story because he really was the last true Western outlaw out here. And I just think it's incredible that it all ended here in Creston. These are a couple photos I found of Harry Tracy, the old outlaw. I hope you enjoy the rest of the videos of this awesome cemetery out here in Creston, Washington. This cemetery goes by the name of the Creston Cemetery. Thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome back. You're probably wondering why I'm talking so late in this episode. Well, it's because I have something a little special planned for you guys that have stuck with the episode for this long. Something that really caught my interest about this Creston cemetery out here was just how many children are buried out here. And I know the farmers back in the day had a hard time out here without modern technology and with the materials that they had to use, without the grid. There were a bunch of different colds and sicknesses that came around and really wreaked havoc on a lot of people out here. And this cemetery really exemplified that to me with the amount of children that are buried here. The last 15 minutes of this episode is going to be a special little tribute to all the children and babies that are buried out in this cemetery. Thank you.